Okay, so this one came out of nowhere, and this is part of what I love about this industry is that sometimes, not often, there is a genuine surprise that we can drop on our audience. It just comes out of nowhere. Nobody seemed to guess this was coming, but the Steam Deck OLED is here. The reviews dropped yesterday as of this recording. We had our video up, and there's a bunch of other great reviews out there as well. Well, you know, what could I say about this? I just love this machine, right? Because
you can tell.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's actually quite an interesting story there, John, because you were talking about the sort of excitement in the intro to my video, and it was basically the case that, you know, I do usually do a pretty tightly scripted video, but for that I was just reading the script and I just went off script because it just wasn't really conveying what I was feeling about this machine, which is yeah, it's quite the thing. So, you know, what are we looking at here? We're looking at a Steam Deck. It looks much the same. That's, you know, it's almost stealth-like in the fact that it presents identically to the standard Steam Deck. But then you turn on the unit, the screen comes on, and it is an absolutely amazing OLED display.
Would you say it's an absolute unit?
Well, whatever you like. But, you know, the bottom line is that... yeah, I fired up Ori and the Will of the Wisps, which is my go-to game for HDR, right? And it's like having an LG television, top-end LG television in the palm of your hand, right? And what bigger recommendation can you have for gaming than that? You know, it's just a brilliant companion to games. It just transforms... the likes of Ori, anything that has a good HDR implementation, and even if it doesn't have a good HDR implementation, you've still got that amazing contrast. I mean, we've got some questions that the audience have got here, but I'm interested in your reaction to this, John, because well, actually quite a few people are wondering in our supporter group whether you're going to buy one, because the screen is essentially the reason you didn't buy the original, right?
That is right. Yeah, I hate the screen in the original Steam Deck. I think it's bad. I think it's a bad screen. It's everything I don't like about LCD thrown in there, right? The viewing angles aren't great. The backlight is extremely evident. It just doesn't look good to my eye. And I said back then when this was first revealed, like I probably wouldn't bother with a Steam Deck until it gets an OLED screen. And everybody was like, oh, I don't think it's going to happen. But here we are. Yeah. And then of course the other problem was the battery life was pretty poor, I would say. Like it's, you know, reasonable enough, but you know, you can't get that much for gameplay time when running higher end applications.
It's a struggle. That's the bottom line. Yeah, you have to be thinking about your settings. You have to be thinking about your frame rate caps in order to eke out extra minutes, right? And the crazy thing is, of course, that this is the best case scenario for PC handheld gaming at the moment.
Yeah.
So you know, yeah.
That's the thing, right? Is like this one looks like it's just long enough where you can almost treat it more like a Switch and just like enjoy the games on there, right? Like, yeah, the high end stuff is still going to drain the battery pretty quickly, but it seems reasonable enough. And you know, between that and the screen, that's basically what I was looking for. And also it sounds like the fan noise has improved.
Yeah.
So you say, Rich, and the original Steam Deck had this kind of shrill sound to it that I found somewhat unpleasant. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you take all those things together, I'm just like, well, you know, Steam Deck, whatever. But this one does actually genuinely have me tempted. I might have to treat myself to one of these when we get, you know, if I can actually get one. I don't know. I mean, the pre-order situation.
Yeah.
Maybe I won't be able to get one. We'll see. But yeah. I would like one because it definitely looks like the machine I had wanted from the original Steam Deck now. And there's a lot of stuff I'd love to play on that. And really HDR and OLED, that sells me big time because the screen, we saw this with the Switch, right, Rich? Where the original Switch LCD, which is better than the Steam Deck LCD, by the way, I would say. They're neither are good. Moving to the Switch OLED was like game changing. It felt like a generational upgrade just because it impacted the quality of what you were seeing on the screen so dramatically. And this one is a step up over the Switch OLED, especially given that it's HDR capable and supports up to 90 hertz, which is awesome. So yeah, this is going to be a huge deal, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. The comparisons with the Switch OLED are quite interesting because well, this is in a different league simply because of HDR, right? 1,000 nits peak brightness.
That's really bright.
And again, that's one of the reasons I chose Ori is the Will of the Wisps to kind of show the game, because it's a killer HDR game, right? And you get that dynamic range, and you just see the fact that it is like a proper high-end OLED with all of the features. And I'm actually hoping that this will serve as kind of like a reference screen for developers when they're doing their games, because there isn't really anything close to a reference screen out there apart from the LG OLEDs, right?
Right.
I'm just sort of blown away by it. There's a lot of other stuff to talk about, but Alex, I'm interested in your initial reactions.
So, like John, I wasn't as perturbed by the screen because I just kind of was like, whatever, it's a handheld. Like, I didn't have any Switch OLED experience because I wouldn't play that thing anyway. Like, I just wouldn't. But with this, I knew what like an LCD looks like, and I was just like, whatever. Like, I just lived with it. But the thing that I even stressed in my original Crisis video that I did was like, oh yeah, but you can play for a while, but it isn't that long. And I think the added battery life is the thing that I really was happy with Valve actually stressing, that they're not going to do a Steam Deck 2 spec upgrade, because they have the new APUs out there. And this is not using the latest AMD tech. It's using a die shrink. And I think going the direction of a die shrink makes much more sense for a mobile console, PC, handheld, hybrid thing, just because you want to actually have the most premium mobile experience possible. And being tethered to a wall is probably not the best thing. So I'm actually most happy about the introduction of battery life kind of enhancements. Second to that is actually the screen's increased refresh rate. 60 hertz is cool. 90 hertz is way cooler. It's much more, for different types of games, you just have a lot more flexibility there. And I think the thing that Rich's video didn't go into that we'll probably talk about some other point in time is the potential latency reductions, because instead of like the old screen when you do a 30 FPS lock, which was probably a recommended thing to do for a lot of games you play on the Steam Deck, is it would, just like most likely double or triple the buffering in most games. And the way you do it, it's just like a much higher latency thing than other types of software locking to 30 FPS. And if you're doing that by actually just running 3 refreshes of the same image and a 90 hertz container for 30 FPS, it should have a lot less latency. And we see that on PC if you do, for example, like 40 FPS and 120 hertz container, which is a recommendation. So these things are all great, and I guess that'll also apply to if you want to do 40 FPS, and it would maybe go down to 80 hertz. I don't know how exactly
how it works. Yeah, okay. Basically, there's a single slider now that you just define your target frame rate, and then it basically works out the multipliers for the screen refresh rate. So yes, if you select 40, then it will switch to 80 hertz. If you go to 45, it will go to 90. It's just a clean divisor by 2 there.
It's just odd that it's not VRR capable.
Yeah, that was the last thing I was
offer you that granular control. Why not VRR?
Yeah, it's interesting. Let's I don't know. Let's plow into some support the questions here, because we're covering a lot of ground here. We had this one from Cowboy Lou. Hey, Rich, with the changes to how the deck screen handles frame rate caps, have there been any improvements to input latency? We're going to check that, because there's no reason we can't just strap an NVIDIA LDAT sensor to the screen. But my reaction is basically that yes, it probably does, and probably more so, for example, if you're 40 FPS in an 80 hertz container, whereas before you would have been 40 FPS in a 40 hertz container. Something we'd have to check there. This question from Edna Mode: while the Steam Deck becomes the go-to handheld for the OLED screen, the ROG Ally and other devices can play more games from this generation. If you guys had to buy a Steam Deck OLED or a 7840U device, what would you choose? That's an interesting question there. And it's similar to the one from Mendo Shitaro. As impressive as Steam Deck OLED is, does its lack of VRR and a significantly faster GPU put it at a disadvantage when compared to ROG Ally and the Lenovo Legion? This is an interesting point, because
those names.
Yeah. Oh my God, those names. They're awful. They're so bad.
Lenovo Legion.
The Steam Deck sounds like Gosh, it sounds like cool. 90s PC goodness. And those things sound all like 2010s PC terribleness. You know what I mean?
I was going to say like mid 2000s PC graphics card boxes.
Is this like they're like sponsored by Limp Bizkit and Korn and all these other things?
Evil Commando.
Evil Commando. I was just about to say that's what we need.
We need an
Evil Commando.
Oh man! Oh,
it's the next one.
The Evil Commando.
Let's try and answer some of these questions though, right? Because from my perspective, it's pretty straightforward, right? All of those 7840U devices and the Z1 Extreme devices like the Lenovo Legion and the ROG Ally. Look, they will play games that the Steam Deck can't, right? That's the bottom line. You can have really good experiences with games that kind of struggle on the Steam Deck. That's the benefit of more performance. It's typically around 30 to 50% more performance. The problem is you're not getting that at 15 watts, which is what the Steam Deck is using. And the battery is basically the same. The batteries are usually the same size as what's in the Steam Deck or the new Steam Deck, 40 watt hour or 50 watt hour. So you're looking at an hour of battery life, an hour 10, an hour 15, if you're lucky, when playing, these demanding games. So this is the choice that's in front of you, right? You accept the performance limitations of the Steam Deck OLED, but you get that amazing screen, you get that amazing battery life, you get those really decent acoustics, or you go for one of these other devices. And, we've heard from Oliver, he loves his ROG Ally, and, it's a really good piece of kit, right? But he's sitting there with power banks plugged in to get to get a decent amount of battery life from it. It's not quite the handheld dream, is it? I'm curious what you think about this, Alex. Would you opt for the Steam Deck OLED or something more powerful, but with let's be honest here, crappy battery life?
It's really up to your use case. I think the mobility is the most interesting part of the Steam Deck, because as soon as you're strapping yourself to a wall, why aren't you using something else? Like, why aren't you playing on a laptop? Why aren't you, I don't know. There's a lot of things. Point. So, as soon as you start doing that, then I think the mobility question goes out the window. And the type of games I would play on the Steam Deck aren't like Returnal, which you showed in your video, Rich, where it's like, we know that's a troublesome game.
Yeah. That doesn't even run on the 7840U.
Yeah, so I'm not so upset about those things. And the only thing that I'm a little tiny bit upset about is the lack of VRR. And that would be the one thing where I would say maybe I'll just wait for Steam Deck Mark III. Unless that's a software thing they can sort out over time, given the new screen. Who knows? I can't say anything there. But I think that's the only thing that I really love in the ROG Ally, right? That's got VRR. And the reason why is because it's going to be a bit different now with the new frame rate limiter. Because earlier, when you would have a V-synced frame at you'd be limiting game to 40 FPS, which I think is reasonable, you'd have when the FPS would dip even just a tiny bit, the frame time would get a little bit too long. Then you'd have the equivalent stutter hiccup of what would be a 20 FPS stutter almost, if you think about it. And it's ooh, you can feel that way more.
It's bad, yeah.
Than you can feel a VRR drop. You wouldn't even see the VRR drop most likely. So VRR is a game changer, I think, in a lot of ways. And that's the only thing about this new device where I go man, that's the holy grail of the Steam Deck at this point. But the rest of the package is so sick. So for me, I would say if you are interested in these devices, really think about how you want to play your games and what games you want to play. If you're fine with just playing older titles or indie games, then the Steam Deck is for you. If you want to do more powerful stuff and are worried about a judder from VSync, then really go for the other devices.
Mm-hmm. That seems fair enough. Mm-hmm. Your thoughts, John?
Actually, thinking about the screen in general, I wanted to ask earlier, do we know if Special K is available for Linux and if it works on the Steam Deck?
I don't know.
I asked that because considering the state of HDR on PC, there's a lot of games that either don't support HDR or have bad HDR. And I find that Special K is kind of a requirement for PC games these days in terms of taking advantage of HDR. So that would actually be something I'd be curious to see. But yeah, I mean, the main, The main thing about the Steam Deck for me, when looking at all these questions here, it just comes down to the fact that it's kind of built to play more like a console, if you will.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. And you kind of lose that. Windows is not a great experience currently on those machines. I mean, I understand that Microsoft has an intention to improve this, but I don't think it's there yet. Right? Mm-hmm. Didn't Phil Spencer call the ROG Ally an Xbox?
Yes, he did. He did.
Which I think is
anything Xbox on the go.
Yeah, I mean, anything at this point could be an Xbox apart from a PlayStation, really, and the Switch, conceivably. Yeah, I mean, I don't really like that. That sort of.
No.
It doesn't feel right to me.
I don't agree with it anyway. I mean, that it can run Xbox services, but I wouldn't consider it an Xbox.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but I understand what they're trying to say there with that. But yeah, I mean, for me, like I said, something like the ROG Ally just isn't that appealing. Like, despite the hardware, it really is just, it just feels like cramming too many PC components into this little portable thing versus Valve really seems to have spent a lot of time making an experience as streamlined as possible, which is what you want on a mobile device usually.
Deck sleep is awesome.
I don't actually like fiddling with mobile devices that much. It just feels less convenient and it's more annoying and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well,
right.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's the issue, right? Is that Steam Deck is a great piece of hardware, but it's not just hardware. I mean, they've basically created a mobile ecosystem that's Steam compatible, and that is not to be taken lightly. And basically when you have these Windows handhelds, I have yet to find one where I haven't had to plug in a keyboard and mouse in order to set things up like you would with a PC. You know, go to the Windows desktop and set things up there. There's so many things that just don't really work. And so, you know, these machines are very much for the enthusiast who want those extra performance features from the latest chipsets. But the Steam Deck is just like, you know, a really good product for the mainstream. But at the same time, you know, with stuff like the frame rate caps and the various other options there in that performance sidebar, there's enough of, you know, the tweakability that you want from a PC as well. I think it's just a really fantastic device. And yeah, I mean, it is basically, if you want to play the latest and greatest games going forward, you're going to require a different device. But the thing about, you know, and I said this in my review, the thing about the Steam Deck OLED is that the quality of that screen just makes you want to go back and revisit your existing library. I mean, you know, Arkham Knight was my first go-to game, and it just looks really terrific on that screen. There's another interesting discussion point that's come up. The release date of the Steam Deck original was 25th of February 2023. We're looking at 2022. We're looking at November 16th, 2023 for the Steam Deck OLED. And some people who bought the Steam Deck are feeling a bit aggrieved that this massive upgrade has come relatively soon. And I guess it is an interesting argument to have, because if this happened in the console space, you know, basically 20 months later, a significantly better revised console came along, you might feel a bit upset. But I'm curious what you guys think about this, because obviously I could accept that on, you know, from the console perspective, but 20 months in the PC space is something quite different in terms of the pace of technological innovation. Alex, what do you think?
I don't feel this way at all. And if I had bought one, I would have known kind of like, there's always any single thing that is in the PC environment. Every single time you buy something, it's immediately out of date. It's immediately out of date.
Isn't.
Not a 4090.
Well, I mean, like 4090 FE, you could drop some water on that. You could do some crazy stuff. It's always not the best.
Okay.
You know what I mean? It's always not the best unless you're a hardcore tweaker.
Yeah, I literally thought you were going to drop some water on it.
I love that term. That's amazing.
Then it would be obsolete because it would no longer work anymore.
Yeah, really big paperweight. But you know, like there's just with that cycle of things, and like you're not always going to have the best. Like just kind of be happy with what you have, kind of thing. And it is the first gen product. Of a company who does do iterations, or either they do iterations or they just drop it completely. I would say in this case, I was really expecting them to do this, and they kind of said it in that one interview. I forget when that was. They said, we're going to do more iterative things. And I felt like this was what the hint was, an iterative Steam Deck. So I wasn't too surprised, other than I think maybe the HDR surprised me. I didn't expect an HDR screen. OLED seemed like the right way to go, but HDR is pretty interesting.
Yeah. Something I didn't mention in my review, but is really, really cool, is that you can bring up HDR scopes and get an idea of the
That's cool.
The sort of peak brightness and everything in any given screen. It's like a real-time monitor. Typically, you'd have to, the way we'd do that in the past to ascertain, the dynamic range of any given game is capture some footage, take it into DaVinci Resolve, and you'll see those pretty much those exact same scopes that you get with the Steam Deck there. It's really an interesting, nice feature. We did get a briefing from Valve, by the way. That was like end of October. Obviously this did come out of nowhere, and I've had some messages asking, well, when did you find out about this? And did you see it at Gamescom? The answer was no. And
No.
October 31st, that was when I got my briefing. And, it's just amazing that this just kind of came out of nowhere. Some stuff that did come out from the interview, though, that we did. They just wanted to keep the same power sort of performance target, just because they want to establish this as a platform. I'm sure they could have got more out of this chip, right? They probably could have increased clocks. They probably could have made various tweaks to get a bit more performance. As it turns out, you do get more performance. And I think it's a combination of the fact that a more efficient chip is operating with the same peak power ceiling. And secondly, you've just got much faster RAM, which basically is like manna from heaven to an AMD APU. I did some performance tests in the review there, and it was actually more exaggerated than the Valve guys kind of let me believe in the interview. But it really does depend on the use case, right? Because it seems to be the case that, well, there's always a battle going on with an APU between, what resource should I give to the CPU? What resources should I give to the GPU? It's kind of a balancing act that's always happening in there. And basically, I believe it's the additional power to performance ratio from the new chip, plus the new memory that's combining to do these improvements. One thing I did show in the video, which I didn't show all of the sequence, but A Plague Tale Requiem, I mean, that rat deluge sequence in the dungeon at the end of the second act is a classic scene, right? But I guess we could actually show the full clip now. Yeah. What we actually see, I think, is that kind of battle between CPU and GPU resources. There's enormous stutter on the old deck, and there's still a lot of stutter on the new one, right? But it's significantly reduced. And when you look at the frame rate differentials there and the frame time graph, it's quite phenomenal to see just how much better the new one is. And I think this is just kind of like an extreme load situation there, but it's it's pretty big stuff. I'd like also to talk about the Eurogamer interview, where basically Valve are saying that the technology doesn't exist yet to create a Steam Deck 2, which I find quite interesting. Valve has always kind of shied away from producing iterative upgrades for the APU, right? Because, you've seen what happens with those APUs in those other handhelds. You get that extra performance, but it tanks battery life. These are bigger chips, right? They have more compute units, they have more CPU cores, and they require more power to operate, even at a decent level. Your base level performance, it just requires more power. And 30 to 50% more performance for doubling power. I just don't think that's a viable upgrade path for a Steam Deck. So I reckon if they can double performance at the same power budget, you've probably got a viable Steam Deck 2, right? But, we're just not seeing that from these chips at the moment. And we've gone through 6 nanometer. We've gone through 4 nanometer with the Z1 Extreme. We're still not there. So, I think Steam Deck 2 is years off. Right?
Yeah, it'll have to be at that point if they don't think even those things are enough. So,
yeah, I mean, the reduced CPU core count in Steam Deck, the reduced compute unit count, it's simply because they get the best balance of efficiency and performance with a reduced amount of components compared to these chips that are being used in the handhelds, which are effectively designed for laptops, right? That's the bottom line. But yeah, I mean, what can I say? It's been a really interesting project to actually, do this. It's just been a lot of fun.
One other thing to tack on, and I mentioned this on socials yesterday, is one of the benefits of the OLED screen is that it solves the problem with the 16:10 aspect ratio.
Yes.
So a lot of PC games don't support 16:10, weirdly enough. And on the original deck, you just get the obvious glowing backlight borders on the screen. Whereas with an OLED screen, it basically just fades away and it looks like it's part of the bezel, right? Which maybe it's a small thing, but for me, it actually does make a big difference in terms of just the aesthetic of playing that device. So
for sure,
another benefit of that technology.
Absolutely. Yeah. So what can I say? I think this is a really good product. I really enjoyed using it. It just looks phenomenal. But yeah, check out my review and others because, it seems it's a bit of a universally positive reception there.